Hello, my name is Omar Harami from Sabeel, Jerusalem. Thank you for joining us for the latest Kumi Now online gathering as we learn how we and our organizations can use our investments and our money to support justice and peace in Palestine and Israel. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that this session is being broadcasted live on Facebook. If you do not wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. We would also love it if you could quickly share one of the links that are being shared in the chat so that others may join. We're now inviting people from the audience to tell us how they are applying Kumi Now back in their community or otherwise advocating for justice and peace in Palestine and Israel. If you have an idea or a project you'd like to share for up to 5 minutes in a future meeting, please email us at kumi@kuminow.com. Now it's time for our weekly activism survey. In a second, we will share the polls. In a few seconds, we will be ending the poll. Thank you so much. So the answer to number 2 is the last answer. Avoid causing or contributing to adverse human rights impacts. And the answer to question number 3 is 16 years old. The BDS movement began July 9th, 2005. We hope that you will find this session interesting and informative. I'd like to start by having Charlotte, our speaker today, to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be with you today. I hope everybody can hear me okay. So far, nobody's shouting the usual, "You're on mute," so I'll assume all is fine. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces and also very new ones. My name's Charlotte Marshall. I'm the advocacy worker for Sabeel-Kairos UK, and we work very closely in partnership with Sabeel Jerusalem, obviously, and the Kairos Palestine movement as well. I've been working for Sabeel-Kairos now since 2014, so about 7 years. And before that, I spent 10 years with Christian Aid on their Middle East desk, doing a variety of roles from sort of advocacy and communications through to program management. I have been passionate about justice for Palestine since university, when I first learned about the issues there, went to see Palestinians and meet them. Followed on my undergraduate with postgraduate studies in Middle East conflict, security and development, and spent a wonderful 3 months traveling around refugee camps in the West Bank, which was probably the best education I could have done for myself about the situation. I live in Surrey, in lovely leafy Surrey, as we call it. I've got 2 small children, Jack, who is 8, and Chloe, who's 3. So my role is part-time and mixed in with being a mum as well. But I do my best to do well at both of them. And yeah, it's just really nice to be here tonight. And obviously, I'll tell you a bit more about what we're going to do in the session a little bit later on. Thanks, Omar.
Thank you, Charlotte. And as it is the tradition and the custom, we will start by giving you an update on the latest developments on the ground in Palestine and Israel. There has been many things happening, so we're really happy that if you're on the Sabeel wave of prayer, you get updated on some topics, and if you're taking part with the Kumi sessions, you'll also get some missing information. So Ghadanfar Atwan, who was under who's under administrative detention until a few days ago. He was released from administrative detention after spending 65 days of hunger strike. So this has been somehow hopeful news for many Palestinians. It's a small victory, but it's an important victory. There's hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians who are arrested and serving and are under administrative detention without being accused or having access to a court. So this has sparked hope. Today was the first day 151 administrative detainees in Ofar prison close to Ramallah started a hunger strike. Hopefully other Palestinian prisoners in different prisons will also start conducting hunger strikes, because it's an effective way to put pressure on Israel to release Palestinian prisoners. 2 days ago, we woke up to sad news. On the right, this is Khalida Jarrar, one of the very famous Palestinian political activists. She's a member of the Palestinian parliament. She is currently in prison in Ofar and under administrative detention. Her administrative detention has been renewed for 4 times since she was arrested. On the left is her daughter, Suha. Her daughter passed away 2 days ago, and today was her funeral. She died a sudden death while being in the apartment. She's an activist. She's very much affiliated with Al-Haq organization, an organization that many of you are aware of. Khalida Jarrar has asked, or many Palestinian human rights organizations, lawyers have asked for her release, at least to attend the funeral of her daughter and to say goodbye. The Israeli authorities refused. Many Palestinians went to Ofar prison demonstrating and saying, you know, she is not accused. She's been she's been serving close to 2 years under administrative detention. Set her free at least to go and attend the funeral. The army started attacked the demonstrators, and today it was decided that the funeral will take place without her. The Palestinian TV in solidarity have broadcasted the funeral of Suha live for multiple hours. Khalida Jarrar is known to be not only a Palestinian leader, political leader outside the Israeli, inside within the Palestinian political arena, but also inside prison. She's many young girls and females in Israeli prison call her mother, because she is the one who follows their schooling and takes care of the young Palestinian female prisoners while they are serving time in Israeli jails. Also, yesterday, suddenly, Hanna Isa, he's a prominent Palestinian Christian figure from Ain Arik, a village close to Ramallah. He has played many important roles within the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. And lastly, he was very much engaged with the Muslim-Christian Palestinian political dialogue. He passed away suddenly, and today was his funeral. So it has really Ramallah, and he was buried in Ramallah. And all of Ramallah is very sad, because 2 important figures that are liked by the people have passed away. Silwan, the roads in Silwan are being closed, all of them. The Israeli army is placing concrete blocks on all of the roads, allowing access to Silwan. There has been a number of demolitions happening in Silwan, although there's 81 houses and buildings under demolition threat. So the media thinks that the Israeli army or the municipality will go in and destroy 81 buildings, but they're doing it one by one at a time. they've already issued fines of hundreds of thousands of dollars for the families if the Palestinian families have to cover the cost of their own home demolitions. So unfortunately, many Palestinian families have started to demolish their own homes because they are afraid that because of the debt, they will have their land confiscated or the family will end up in prison. So it's a very sad reality now in Silwan. This is a young girl from Silwan. Her father had to demolish the house, the building that they live in, because of afraid of fines. And now they have moved to live in their car. So what's very sad for the girl, it was very touching because she doesn't understand why her father destroyed the building and now they're living in the car. The only thing that she was able to save was her teddy bear. So it's a very sad reality. We're back to reality in Jerusalem and in Palestine. I wish there were more hopeful news to give, but this is the reality living under occupation. So now we will move to you, Charlotte. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you for the update as well. It's just so sad to hear these stories. I mean, I know you hear them time and time again, don't we? But hearing about Suha's death and thinking about her own mother not being able to attend the funeral, it's just devastating. It just shows really the scale of inhumanity, doesn't it, that we're faced with here, and the inhumanity of the Israeli government and those making these kind of decisions. Let's move on. I'm going to share my screen with you. Please, somebody let me know if you can't see the full-size screen. But I will assume unless
it's very clear.
Good, thank you, Omar. Thank you. Today, what I really want to do today is not to talk to you just about what our Investing for Peace campaign is, but to really talk about what's happened in the last year. And I'm going to hope that a lot of you joined us last year for Kumi now around this time when I spoke about what our Investing for Peace campaign was and gave you all of the background to it. And so that therefore this will be a bit of an update from that. But I will start, don't worry, just by sort of very quickly going over the campaign aims. And then, as I say, move a bit more into what's happened this year and some of the successes and the challenges that we have faced. So we began our Investing for Peace campaign around 5 years ago now, quite a long time. And our sort of key aims are really around getting churches to put in place some sort of screening process, like they do for other ethical issues, be that currently fossil fuels or issues like tobacco and alcohol and weaponry or arms trading, but put in place an investment screen that basically screens out companies which are operating in the occupied territories, usually against international law in areas where the Israeli government has allowed them to have access, even though it's Palestinian land. And all of the profits that they get are either going to them as a company and of course also to the Israeli government through the sort of dividends that they pay them. So any sort of investment screen that would effectively identify those companies and then screen them out. So are really asking our churches not to be complicit in this occupation, to do what they can within their grasp, within their control, with their finances, to make sure that they are in no way supporting the illegal actions in the occupation. And a sort of first part of that also involves churches becoming more transparent about the companies that they're invested in. And that's because often what we found through our research is that a church might issue an annual report, for example, a financial one. It may give you the top 20 companies that they invest in, but they could be invested in up to 300 or 400. And so a lot of the time we don't actually know, are these churches invested in any of these companies that we see violating human rights in Palestine, or are they not? So asking churches to be more transparent that way, asking them to put in place an investment screen. And then not only does that investment screen hopefully stop them from investing in any company in the future that might be profiting from the occupation, but it also gives them a reason to divest from companies they're already invested in. this is sort of all alongside recognizing that most of our churches don't have a strategy that involves divestment. And the sort of movement we've seen to divestment in the likes of the climate change campaigns and the fossil fuels is quite new for a lot of our churches. So what they usually do is involve themselves in what's called engagement or corporate engagement. So as a stakeholder, as a shareholder in a company, they will try and use their influence to impact that company, to challenge it on its human rights record or another ethical issue it's working on, and to try and actually get them to change their practices. And it's a widely recognized strategy to use. It's not necessarily a bad strategy, but we have been challenging churches and saying, you know, there needs to be a structured process behind that. It needs to be time-bound, it needs to be accountable, it needs to be structured. Otherwise, these companies and you can spend years and years and years engaging, and actually what's the outcome of that? Often for the Palestinian community that's maybe been affected by something, very poor. So we would like churches to divest. We recognise they want to engage. We want that to be something that's a lot more structured. So that's what the aims of our campaign have been. And as I say, we've been working on this for about the last 5 years. And this is always a quote which I use when I talk about this. It's from Desmond Tutu. It was his call out to the Presbyterian Church who began this work on divestment way back in 2014. The Americans are actually considerably ahead of us on this line. And he says, we learned in South Africa that the only way to end apartheid peacefully was to force the powerful to the table through economic pressure. Now, we're under no illusions. We are pretty sure that Israel is not going to be forced to the table because our churches divest, but it is part of a bigger movement. It's part of a bigger global movement to divest. And that's going on in universities, in local councils, in different sort of, certainly in the UK, and a lot of different companies and businesses. And so we see that our call to the church is part of that larger civil society movement to divest from the occupation. And we think that it's a critical and important thing that the church can do. So who do we actually work with? Well, we've had a number of things happening this year, which I'm going to go on to talk about. But what we did do originally was to set up groups in each of the major denominations in the UK. And you can see here familiar names: the Methodists, the Church of Scotland, the Catholic Church, the Quakers, Church of England, and the United Reformed Church. And these were not official groups endorsed by the church. They were just groups of our members and our campaigners who wanted to try and make a difference within their denomination. And in 2018, the Quakers, through that group, decided that they would follow our guidance. They would put in place a policy that stopped them from investing in any company profiting from the occupation. But since 2018, we've been working away with these other sort of denominations, trying to get them to look at new policies, trying to encourage them into this way of thinking. And I'm going to give you 2 examples now of some of the successes that we've seen in the last year, which are really exciting, having sort of worked on this for a long time and being sort of plugging away in the background. So we've been working very closely this year in particular with our group in the Methodist Church. And I know some of them are on this call, so I won't name them, but they are, some of them are with us today. The Methodist group have been, for a number of years now, putting forward resolutions to their national conference each year. And those resolutions are called memorials in the Methodist Church. I'm apologising now for the lingo. I know it's unfamiliar to some, so I'll try and explain it. Back in 2019, they challenged the church about their investment policy relating to Israel and Palestine, and said they felt it needed updating. But at that point, the Methodist Church felt that they were doing enough, that their process of engagement was working, and that they didn't really feel the need to change that. So all of those resolutions that were put forward in 2019 were rejected and denied. So again, last year, we went back again. A lot of this campaigning work is repetition, keeping going, trying to gather more support, doing the same thing year in, year out to just add on the pressure. So in 2020, the Memorials to Conference once again challenged them to review their current investment policy in light of the deteriorating situation in Palestine. And that last sort of bit about a deteriorating situation was really put in there to try and highlight that the situation in Palestine has changed a lot in the last 10 years. We have seen huge amounts of de facto annexation, and obviously in July last year, a sort of formal annexation nearly went ahead by the Israeli government. We've seen the record numbers of homes demolished, farmlands taken over, record numbers of settlements being built, new levels of violence and aggression by settlers and by the Israeli army as well. So we were trying to highlight that, you've had a policy in place, but things are changing on the ground. And for Palestinians, they're getting worse. And it's really, it's a call for the church to step forward and step up in its support for justice for Palestinians. Unfortunately, then the pandemic came along, which sort of scuppered our plans a little bit, as it did for most people, I'm sure. And the only things that were dealt with at Methodist Conference in 2020 were what they called essential business. The whole thing moved online. Normally, it's hundreds of people meeting, debating, having fringe events, exhibitions. But this was very different last year for many churches with their national conferences. So they moved online. And therefore, what they did with these memorials was referred them to the Methodist Council. And that's the body that really deals with all the business that comes up related to policy and related to bigger sort of debates and issues between one conference one year and the next year. So the Methodist Council looked at the memorials in November. They decided to commission a report which would update them on what was happening in Palestine and make some recommendations. And we were really delighted that in January this year, that report was officially sort of released to the wider public, and the Methodist Council effectively endorsed that report. And in that report, it urged the Joint Advisory Committee on the Ethics of Investment, who are the ethical investment body that advise the Central Finance Board of the Methodist Church, to look at how companies operating in Israel can actually demonstrate how they are separate from the settlements. So looking at the fact that the settlements and the state of Israel are becoming increasingly integrated. And the second bit, which was really key for us, was that when a company is unwilling to refrain from operating in the occupied territories, the Joint Advisory Committee would in most cases advise exclusion from investment. And this is what we were really campaigning for. It's a move away from, well, we're going to invest in all these companies and they might not be doing brilliant things, but we'll engage with them and we'll find out how they're getting on and we'll see if we can challenge them to actually, if they are violating Palestinian human rights, we won't invest in them in the first place. And at conference this year, they adopted that report and have asked the Joint Advisory Committee and the Central Finance Board to revise that policy by next year. We know they're working on it already, so hopefully it will be done quicker than that. But this was a really significant win for us in the campaign. At the same time, I think that the reason I want to talk about this next slide is that it doesn't necessarily relate directly to the investment work that we're doing, but our campaigners are not just there to just talk about investments the whole time. They want to be bringing all of the Palestinian story to life in our churches. So at the same time as talking about the investment policy, they went to conference this year with new memorials about we need to support our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Christ. We need to stand in solidarity. We need to take a stance against the occupation more firmly. And the way that they did that was to ask the Methodist Church to read, endorse, and commend the Palestinian Cry for Hope, which came out in July last year. And really wonderfully, the Methodist Church voted and agreed that that's what they would do. They would commend for careful and prayerful study by the Methodist people the document Cry for Hope. And they also went further than what we actually called on them to do, to talk about how they could be a force for good in our political system as well. And they're calling on the British government to end support for military contracts with Israel whilst that country remains in violation of international law. So if you're thinking at the end of this, well, I really want to get involved, but I'm not sure about the investment work. I think that's interesting, but maybe I don't know too much. Firstly, you don't need to. We can help you and support you in that. But also, our groups work wider than just on that issue. It's about bringing those Palestinian stories and that information to the headlines in the church. The other thing I just wanted to mention with the Methodist Church, which again talks a little bit, I guess, about our strategy with this, is that whilst we're doing these big sort of very public facing things, putting forward memorials, resolutions, issuing statements, there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes as well. It's really our ultimate desire is not to sort of shame the churches into doing anything or condemn them for not doing enough. It's about saying, you know, we're here as a resource to offer you our help, our relationships, our expertise, the information we have access to on the ground. And this example that I'm bringing up now on the screen is an example of how we've done that this year. So with our ongoing engagement with the Central Finance Board and the Methodist Church, we've been talking to them about the fact they've been invested in Caterpillar. We all know probably that Caterpillar have been complicit in the occupation for a very long time. They have huge numbers of bulldozers, which are used to demolish Palestinian homes, clear farmlands for Israeli settlements. A large number of churches in America and around the world have already divested from Caterpillar. But we knew that the Central Finance Board still held shares in them. So we put together a report on Caterpillar's most recent activities. And we worked in partnership with a wonderful Israeli organization called Who Profits to do this, who are based in Tel Aviv, on the ground researchers. They have a huge database of about 400 companies that work in the occupied territories. And they'll be really happy if you have questions to fire off a question about a company, and they'll do what they can to find out the latest information. So through issuing this report, it was presented at their AGM in May, and they divested from Caterpillar, which was really wonderful to see. We even managed to get them to agree that we could issue this statement from a member of the finance board, which talked about how Caterpillar can't claim it doesn't know what it's using its bulldozers for. It knows exactly how they're used, and it should be ashamed. And that was a really significant win for us, because whilst all the policy work's going on, we want to show our partners and the people we work with that there are successes happening all the time in the campaign. So on to our second and very, very recent success, which we are delighted about. And again, I know some of our United Reformed campaigners are on this call, so I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this. We've had a United Reformed Church campaign group for many years now. They have been really focused on raising awareness in the United Reformed churches about what's happening in Palestine, about trying to make links between different organisations and Christians in Palestine to the churches here in the UK. And right back in 2016, one of the members put forward a resolution to their General Assembly, quite a sort of basic resolution, just calling on them to support Palestinian Christians, to support and endorse the Kairos Palestine call. And at the time, I think the United Reformed Church not voted against this, but voted instead to set up a group which would look into this further. I don't think they felt that they had enough experience or knowledge or understanding to say yes to something, but they wanted to show and be willing to look into it further. So they commissioned a group that would go and visit Palestine, and they went in 2019, that would come back and raise awareness in trusts and synods, which they've done, and would then actually come back to conference and come back to the General Assembly at some point with some more firm recommendations about what the United Reformed Church could do. Excuse me, I'm going to have a quick drink. And so the result of all of that, 5 years on, was that we have worked really closely with the United Reformed Church in the last year to help them shape 10 resolutions on Israel and Palestine, 2 of which have called for morally responsible investment by their trusts and synods. And General Assembly took place just last week. And on Friday, I was delighted. I watched the debate live. You could stream it on their website and on their Facebook page, and that all of those resolutions were passed. I'm going to go on and just show you one of them. And this comes from the statement they issued on their website. After years of research, discernment, prayer, visits, and collaboration with national and international partners, the United Reformed Church has also given its public commitment on investment policies which screen out international companies that benefit from the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. Such a wonderful result. We could not have wished for more. They also had resolutions on education, on pilgrimage, on buying Palestinian products that you can here in the UK. Some really wonderful, very action-orientated resolutions, which are really driving the URC forward in their support and solidarity. And as part of that They had Munther Isaac, who many of you will know from Bethlehem Bible College, speaking at their General Assembly. And I think, you know, this is what we have to remember, that all of the time we're doing this, you know, Palestinians are looking to us here in the UK to take actions which help them to feel that they are firstly supported by the church as brothers and sisters in Christ, but also that they are not forgotten, and that their plight is not forgotten in our international community. And I think this quote really sort of sums that up for me. That's one of the significant wins out of all of this. So what we're going to ask you to do, and I'm going to come back to this, is our action today is actually going to be to thank the URC for passing these resolutions. As I'm sure many of you will know, these sort of decisions do not come without their risks and without their challenges. And there will be undoubtedly some people in our communities and some people higher up in our governments or in institutions that very much disagree with what the URC has decided to do in these resolutions. And they will be the ones that are first to email, tweet, put something on Facebook. As soon as the Methodist decision happened at conference, the chief rabbi was the first on Twitter to condemn it and to say he thought it was anti-Israeli, it was singling out Israel. So we know that sort of backlash can come quite strongly. So we want to show the URC that actually there are a lot of people out there, particularly in the Christian circles, who are really grateful and excited to see these sort of resolutions passing at conferences. So I've got 3 ways that you can do that today. A quick email to say thank you and well done. You can tweet them or you can send them a message on Facebook. But we're going to come back to that at the end as our action that we take together. Just very briefly, 2 things to end. Challenges. As I've just mentioned, one of the significant challenges, probably the most significant challenge, particularly in the last 5 years, has been dealing with accusations of anti-Semitism, particularly those that are levelled at anyone who speaks out against the state of Israel. But also they've been used in quite a manipulative way with those of us that campaign within the BDS movement. They've been used in a manipulative way towards churches because of the history of anti-Semitism in churches, which is a very real thing, but doesn't mean that that should prevent us and stop us for speaking up for justice today. We've had a lot of challenges in churches being very hesitant to upset the UK Jewish community, the chief rabbi, the British Board of Deputies of Jews, who have radically different opinions on using boycott, divestment and sanctions to hold Israel to account. Of course, the usual challenges. We're a small, very small organisation, time and money. On the first one, probably the most significant one, you know, this is a grassroots campaign. What we need are campaigners. We need people within the churches who will take on putting forward resolutions, who will talk within their churches, who will share events, who will bring that voice of Palestinian Christians to the forefront. And so if you, as I say, if you're on this call today and you're interested in this campaign, please join us. It's what we need are people on the ground. And of course, working in churches, lots of you will know, they all have their unique structures. I've had to spend a lot of time trying to understand and figure them all out. But sometimes those structures are a real hindrance. And sometimes, as we've seen with the Methodists and with the United Reformed Church, they can allow us to do great things. We just have to learn how to work with them. And that can be a bit of a challenge in itself. So opportunities. Well, I'm so delighted that I can write that we now have 3 major church denominations here in the UK, the Quakers, the Methodists and the United Reformed Church, all following our guidelines. And when I say following our guidelines, you know, they're not signing a piece of paper that says, yes, we follow the Investing for Peace campaign. What they're doing is committing themselves to doing what they can to ensure they don't invest in the occupation. And often that means we're not even mentioned, and that doesn't matter. That's actually fine. What we want to do is seeing them make this commitment and to further their support and solidarity. So it's very exciting to see that. We still have a long way to go, particularly in the Church of England. And I know some of our Church of England members are on this call as well, and in other denominations. But as I said, this is a grassroots movement. So the more people we get, the more that join, the more that raise their voice, the more the hierarchy in the church and what happens at the top level has to listen to what happens underneath. the one really positive thing about the pandemic, and we've got to find a silver lining, haven't we, is that we have had this brilliant opportunity to get Palestinian voices heard in our churches in a way that we never have before. You know, it usually costs several £1,000s to bring a Palestinian speaker over to try and get them to do a conference or a large event. And Zoom has, you know, it's offered us that opportunity to join Palestinians every week if we want, hear about the situation, find out what they're doing, find out what we can do to help. And that's something we have to keep up, because that voice, you know, the voice of Mother Isaac in the United Reformed Church Assembly, that's such a powerful voice. That's hearing it direct from the lived experience of Palestinian Christians on the ground. And that's what we need to be echoing. And also, you know, we have an opportunity as well, which we've not even really begun to investigate, but to work with others on divestment. You know, divestment campaigns at the moment on fossil fuels, nuclear, climate change. And there's perhaps ways that we can work within those movements to all support each other. You know, we're all looking at ethical investment. We're all looking at challenging the churches on how they use their money to be a force for good. So some really good opportunities there. As I've said, this is how you can join us. We need campaigners. You can raise awareness in your community and church, or you can do that with us nationally. You can do some research on how your church uses its funds. You know, a lot of our work has been piecing together, okay, so how do churches relate to their diocese? How do the diocese relate to, you know, the national investing bodies? How does all that fit together as part of the picture, and where can we influence change? And we also have some resources you can use. So we have free downloads on our website. This is our Investing for Peace, a guide for local church activists, which was written in 2019. And that's just an example of one of the quotes that's in there. But a fair few pages on how you can be involved. And I'll put the links, or probably Ryan will put the links to that in the chats. And our Investing for Peace postcard, which if you like to write to your church and you want some help to do so, it's a very simple way. Just address it to your church leader. You could send it to your local church leader, or you could send it to the Archbishop of Canterbury. We don't mind who it goes to, which just asks them, what are you actually doing about this? You know, how do you know where your money is used? And what are you doing to make sure your money is not used to further the occupation? So that's the update from me today. I'm going to leave that one up there because I believe that we're going to be potentially doing this action together shortly. But thank you very much for listening, and I'll be delighted also to take some questions in a minute. Omar, I think I'm handing back to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Charlotte, would it be possible to have the email at least in the chat so that we can copy it and paste?
Yeah, let me pop it in there now.
So please, we're asking you, we're changing a little bit of the schedule. So we're asking you to send an email now, just thanking the church for being faithful to the values that they preach. And we will also encourage you to send it to 2 or 3 people, or as many people as possible, but a minimum of 2 or 3 people that are aware of Palestine and would like to do something about it. Just give them the good news. Something has happened. It's an important step, and we need to encourage the people who were brave enough to break the silence.
Omar, I've just realised I can't do that unless I end the slideshow. So I don't know, could Ryan copy it in for us? Would that be possible? Or I can end the slideshow and then put it back on.
I just did.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. You're amazing. So we'll give you just a few minutes before we move to the questions and answers. So to make the best of the time, we will start with the questions. So Charlotte, we have a number of questions. The first question, how does the RC Church engage with SK at all?
Okay, brilliant. That's a good question to start us off. Let me just open this up again. I've stopped sharing now, Omar. Is that better?
Yes.
We can see a few more people on the screen then. Wonderful. Well, oh, it said it stopped sharing, but it hasn't. Hang on a minute. There we go. That's
okay,
better.
perfect.
We have got a Catholic Investing for Peace campaign group. It's a small group, but very active and quite spread across the UK as well, which is helpful because obviously different things happen in different dioceses and archdioceses as well. So the two main things we've been working on at the moment are there's just been a new Catholic fund set up, which is run through an investment company called the CCLA, who do a lot of investments for all of the churches. They invest money on behalf of the United Reformed Church, the Church of England, which is a very significant part of them, the Church Investors Group, which includes both Christian organisations and churches, and a number of individual dioceses, and nationally the Catholic Church invests through CCLA. So CCLA have just set up a new Catholic fund, and it has a lot of ethical sort of limits on that fund. So there's a lot of limits on what the money will be invested in because of ethical values that the Catholic Church has. And what we're doing at the moment is challenging them on their human rights part of that. So it's not very comprehensive, the human rights part. And there is a recognition, I think, amongst that ethical investment subgroup that there needs to be more on human rights. And one of the things I should have mentioned in my presentation actually is when we talk about an investment screen for Palestine, a lot of churches, particularly in America, have gone down the route of using much broader screens which talk about human rights in general. So not just in Palestine, we might be talking about human rights in China, human rights in Burma. It doesn't really have to be a screen that's just set up to work for Palestinians and to screen out companies who are violating Palestinian rights. And that's what we're actually talking to the Catholic Church about, something that would apply across the board in many different situations around the world, but would put this issue of human rights at the forefront in the same way that perhaps they will put other issues. So if you are a member of the Catholic Church and you're interested in joining us, please just drop me an email. We have regular meetings, usually every sort of 6 weeks. We have a strategy. People come to the meeting, we talk about what we're going to do, we go away, we write letters, we set up meetings with people. And we've got some wonderful active members of that group who are actually on this call. So if any of them also want to contribute to this, then please say so. Omar, you're on mute.
Thank you, Charlotte. And we have plenty of questions. I don't think we're going to be able to cover them all. But so if you can give short answers, if possible, that would be really nice, Charlotte. What
No problem.
backlash you face from Zionist and Christian Zionist organizations or individuals?
It hasn't come much directly to us, partly because, as I said, the church doesn't necessarily announce that it's working with us on these issues. So when the Methodists made their decisions at conference this year, there was a piece issued in the Jewish News, which was very sort of condemning of what they'd done. It said they were, singling out Israel. It said that they were I think it called it bordering on anti-Semitism. We have had the usual levels and accusations which come from almost any Zionist group to any pro-Palestinian group. Depending on how that happens, depending whether it's a very public-facing comment, such as on Twitter or Facebook, or whether it's much more discreet behind the scenes, we just try and address what they're saying and refute it. It's things like, I saw somebody mentioned in the chat, the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism gives us a great opportunity to talk about how campaigning for Palestinian human rights is not a question of anti-Semitism. It is not anti-Semitic to support a non-violent movement for freedom and justice. And we also talk about how the church has to acknowledge its history of anti-Semitism and apologize for that and be upfront that in the past we have a terrible reputation when it comes to this. But that was the church of the past and it isn't the church of today. I think the church of today has worked very hard on those interfaith relations. So yes, we have had it and we do have to deal with it ongoing.
Thank you. How does the Church of Scotland measure up in divestment as compared to the Methodist Church?
Oh, good question. The Church of Scotland has the situation with the Church of Scotland is very complicated. They have property inside Israel, so they have a hotel in Tiberias. They have schools as well, which are inside the 67 borders. So I know they have a very difficult dynamic and difficult situation because they have to be very careful about what happens to those properties should, for example, they do a massive divestment from any company profiting from occupation. The Israeli government comes along and says, well, hang on a minute, we're closing your hotel or we're closing your school. Now, we have still challenged them, but we believe that they still need to look at where their money is invested and still be responsible for that and still be justice orientated. They committed back in 2018 at their General Synod, I think they call it, to a review of their investments, which they said would only take 6 months, but I think they are still doing that and that is still ongoing. So we have a very small group that we're working with in Scotland. Many of them are members of the Iona community who are also Church of Scotland ministers or part of Church of Scotland churches. And we're also doing some work within the Episcopal Church of Scotland. So again, if you want to join us, let me know and I can include you in those groups.
Thank you. What is the position of the Roman Catholics?
The official position, they wouldn't have a position on investments in Israel and Palestine. They have, as I've mentioned sort of previously, they have this particular Catholic fund, which they are now putting a lot of their investments through. That has a line in about a commitment to maintaining the rights of people who live in the places where they invest their money in. It's sort of a very loose commitment to human rights without being very sort of in detail. And that's what we found in the Church of England as well until very recently. So until recently, the Church of England had very in-depth policies on all of their different screening processes and all the different things they were concerned about. So, there would be a policy about weapons, tobacco, pornography, modern slavery, climate change, but nothing on human rights. And they have very recently just revised that, and they have put together a whole policy on human rights. And we are encouraging the Catholic Church to look at that policy and how that policy might be used then to implement a more human rights framework in their investments. I think it's fair to say that I don't think the church, any of our churches, go out there with the view and aim of investing in terrible companies which violate human rights. I think 90% of the time they're invested in companies which are ethically probably some of the best, but they are usually, what we have found is they are very unaware of the number of companies that are now operating in the occupied territories who are benefiting from the occupation. We know the big names, we know the G4Ss, we know the Caterpillars, the JCBs, but underneath all of those big companies are 400 at least other companies who are profiting from the occupation of Palestine. And they might often only be, 40th, 50th, 60th on your investment portfolio. You might only have £100,000 worth of shares, but your money is then still going directly towards supporting that activity in Palestine. So that's where we've been trying to do a lot of education with the churches about how they find out about these companies and the need to actually check their investment portfolios against that research.
Thank you. Another question, how do you respond when someone says that we are singling out Israel?
Yes, this is a good one, which they do a lot because understandably that's what we work on. So this is where some churches have decided to go down the route of a much more general investment policy that focuses on protecting human rights, because it takes you away from that sort of, you know, oh, you're just focusing on Israel, why not human rights in China? You know, why not look at human rights situations elsewhere? Certainly the, I think it's the Episcopal Church in America went down that route and decided to actually have what they called an international human rights screen rather than a screen concerning Israel and Palestine. Our message to the church has been, we're singling out Israel because we are concerned and fighting for Palestinian human rights. But this type of screen does not have to be exclusive. And we, of course, are an organization that focuses on that. But if you believe that as a church, you should be careful where your money is being invested in China, then we would absolutely stand behind you and say, you should be protecting human rights around the world. You know, your investments should not be used to abuse the rights of anybody in the world. So it's a sort of, you know, it's a bit of a difficult one that we want to work on this issue because that's what we have the expertise and the connections in, but it's a recognition that the church can look at this as a wider issue as well. And somebody's just popped something in the link, I think it's Ryan, about the American Friends Service Committee, who have a really useful database, which doesn't just look at occupation. It has that as one area, but it has other areas of human rights situations that churches can use and look at where their investments are being used. So there are some really good resources out there that can help them do that.
Thank you. Can you say a bit more about the difficulties in the Church of England?
Oh yeah, I could probably talk all day about this one. I'll limit it, Omar, don't worry. Our Church of England group have made some brilliant progress in this last year. And if I'd had the time, I'd have talked about how all our denominations are working so hard to move this forward. There are two things that are very significant in the Church of England. The first is that the current Archbishop of Canterbury has a very strong and unique relationship with the Chief Rabbi and with the British Board of Deputies and with the Jewish community as a whole. He comes from a Jewish background. He's made it very clear in the past that he will protect those relationships at the cost of a lot of other things. That said, we have seen him set up a number of things. He's got what's called a Ministry of Reconciliation, which has been trying to engage with both Palestinians and Israelis. We have had a lot of interaction this year in particular with his chief interfaith advisor, Reverend Richard Sudworth, who actually came to one of our Cry for Hope seminars where he heard Palestinian Christians. So it was actually Father Fadi Diab and Muntha Isaac talk about the occupation, talk about what life was like living in West Bank as a Christian. So we have had some interest from them and some engagement with them, but we do find that firstly, their structure is very difficult to sort of get into. So in order to get anything sort of policy happening at a national level, you have to get something happening at General Synod. Before it gets to General Synod, it has to go through probably 15 other steps to get there. But we do have a lovely member of our group who's working on that in her diocese, and she's put forward a diocesan synod motion, which is due to be debated in October this year, and we're working very closely to support her. And I think, you know, it's just about chipping away. This is a grassroots movement. We can't, you know, if I'd love to be able to sit down face to face with the Archbishop of Canterbury and say, look, why don't you just do this? This is a brilliant idea. It'll really move you towards justice. But with the best one in the world, he's not going to listen to me and he's not going to do it. But if lots of churches are asking questions at their diocesan synods, putting forward motions, asking questions at General Synod, writing, you know, the amount of times we've heard back from people saying, just keep writing, it's all pressure. We actually had, you know, we had a meeting with the investment managers for a lot of the Church of England's money. And the head of responsible investment said to us, oh, you're the ones that always write to us. We're doing something right if you know that. You know, if they're getting lots of letters every month, they've got to sit up and take notice, because that means people within the Church of England are bothered and care. And they need to care about those members and what those members think. So it's challenges, but we keep chipping away at it. And we do have, as I say, we have a brilliant, really active group in the Church of England. So again, you know, come and get involved in it if that's your denomination.
Unfortunately, the time is up. Thank you everyone for joining us today. A link to the video of this gathering, along with all the links shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or so. And it will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you receive them. We would greatly appreciate it if you shared this amazing session with your friends and colleagues, as well as information on our future sessions. Next week, we will address the Israeli apartheid wall. If you'd like to be reminded of the online gatherings an hour before they begin, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online using the form at the bottom of the page. We hope to see you back here in a week's time. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, Charlotte. It has been amazing having you, and it has been a great session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Omar. I've just put my email address in the chat, so please do email if you have any questions I couldn't answer, or if you'd like to get in touch.
And we will include it in the coming newsletter.
Brilliant.
Okay, Charlotte. Thank you.